I want to welcome our second speaker, Micha Danziger, and I'd like to remind everybody that Danziger is Danzig. It's, I don't know why is it Poland. It's actually part of Prussia. But he's a PhD candidate from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And from what I understand, you're interested in the relation between philosophy and Shoah and violence and how to address this with theological thinking. And he's going to talk to us about the sobriety of Hannah Arendt and J. Glenn Gray. So, Micha, please.
So, in this paper, I want to introduce the relationship between Jessie Glenn Gray and Hannah Arendt, and I'm going to argue that the concept of sobriety is a virtuous quality in Gray's and Arendt's analysis, which is exemplified in their understanding of violence, humanism, and also their relationship or their attitude towards Heidegger, which is at the end. Hopefully I'll get to it. And just as a working definition, the word sober is derived from the Latin soberius, without intoxication or drink, ibirus. This could suggest that a sober person has consumed or experienced a kind of inebriation but hasn't become drunk. The sober person has a concrete experience but isn't overconsumed to the point of intoxication. And so he has a sense of orientation. How does Birthright say? You could drink but don't get drunk. We've all played with this. So just for the biography in the Library of Congress, we have the Arendt and Gray correspondences donated by Gray's daughters. It's over 350 pages, and they're letters, personal inquiries, academic publications, philosophical discussion with Arendt and Gray. And you read I've read lots of the correspondence, and there's an apparent intimacy between them. Either Arendt supporting Gray supporting Arendt during the Eichmann trial, or the publishing of the Eichmann, or Arendt asking about his wife Ursula and how she's doing. Arendt and Gray first met in '61 in the fall at Wesleyan University. They both had fellowships. They had nearby offices, and immediately they became friends. And other than slightly mentioning in biographies, Gray is considered a good friend, but there hasn't been any real research about their relationship, nor Gray himself. And Arendt, appreciative of Gray, helped Gray with his most important work, The Warrior's Reflection on Men in Battle, by writing an insightful introduction to the book and for its reprinting. And in exchange, also, Arendt also wrote an essay on understanding violence philosophically, and he references Arendt quite a bit. So there's a working relationship and a friendly relationship between them. But especially after Karl Jaspers died in '69 and Heinrich Blücher died in 1970, Gray became Arendt's mentor or reader, advisor, along with Mary McCarthy, and they discussed intensely her projects, like The Life of Mind that was published afterwards. And Gray published 2 essays on Arendt after her death, The Winds of Thought and The Abyss of Freedom in Hannah Arendt. And these are pictures of Arendt and Gray. I got that from Gray's daughters. They sent me that picture. It's a very philosophical look with the pipe. Now let's talk about Gray's sobriety. This is also a picture I got from Gray's daughters of him as a soldier. To understand Gray's sobriety, we have to look at war literature. Works of war literature tend to miss their own objectivity by abstraction. At a psychological level, the war novel attempts to give an impression of the horrible consequences of war, but it often results in romanticization or apocalyptic picture of war. And in the end, usually war literature ends either in this kind of naive pacifism or a machoism argument for the necessity of war, vitalness. Obviously, what comes to mind is All Quiet on the Western Front or Thunders of Storm, Steel of Storms, I'm misquoting. These two And what happens is in these, and in the historical explanations of war, specifically military accounts, they might contextualize the conflicts, but they take out the subjective aspect of it, and which makes it even more abstract, war. And what happens is the consequences of removing the individual warrior from the battle, you could also dehumanize the experience of war. These kinds of accounts are essentially to understand war and soldiering, however much they expose it, they also conceal. And these works of war literature, be it nonfiction or fiction, distance the actuality of war many times from its concreteness. Now, overcoming these obstacles, Gray's The Warriors is centered around his journals written during his time in the European theater of World War II. He was an intelligence officer. And his journals entries, they are a constant entry point in his philosophical contemplation. He looks at his journals, and in the book, he contemplates about it. And what that creates is a reflection, a philosophical, phenomenological reflection from the concrete reality of war. And you could, this is part of the phenomenological project, that from the subjective, you derive a universal, something more that's general. And the topics in The Warrior, such as awe, death, guilt, friendship, and violence, though are all within the context of World War II, but after his rigorous examination, reveal a larger description about humanity. And in the 6th chapter, the enduring appeals of battle, while seeing the bombardment of mass invasions of the French Riviera in August 44, Gray writes, "If we are honest, a satisfaction in having seen them. As far as I'm concerned, at least part of the satisfaction can be ascribed to delight in aesthetic contemplation. Faced with that feeling of an aesthetic fascination, encountering a mass violence, you can feel ashamed. Like what Gray is saying is, I see bombing, and it's beautiful. And you kind of feel ashamed, but he doesn't apologize for that. He sees that in battle, and he's not apologetic. He realizes that there's a beauty to war. And he realizes that the experiences changes a person's orientation. It's frustrating to realize that even though war is dreadful, there are parts in it that are beautiful or good experiences. This fact is undeniable to any soldier. And it's recognizing that war is a human endeavor, inhibiting all variants of the human condition. And his attention and awareness to those various experiences of the battle escalates to also the tragedy. Humans wage wars, not automatons. I think an example of this, and this is one of the more powerful scenes in Jarhead, 2005 movie about the Gulf War, that the soldiers walk through a Kuwait oil field aflamed, and the skies are blackened. We know the pictures, and there's an aesthetic there. You see, like if you've seen the movie, or you could watch war movies, and there's a beauty in that. But it doesn't romanticize. If anybody's seen Jarhead, there's also a reality about the war there. And to deny those experiences in war and the army would be ideological blindness. And Gray's sobriety is the honesty in acknowledging that there's a sublime in devastation, that there's a unique kind of strong friendship, for example, friendship between soldiers. This enables Gray to enter depth of phenomenological warfare, bypassing the tendency to analyze war in a naive pacifism or romantic perspective. And to quote one of the essays in honoring him, in reading The Warriors, one is struck by the power to describe and thus revivify the frightening and yet seductive experience of war. This fairness to the totality of experience of war avoids both the superficial glorification of mindless patriotism and the naive utopianism of those who, after every war, believe that somehow no one could ever be again attracted to it. Yet there's no doubt that Professor Gray's opposition to war, there is instead a sobriety that falls from direct, honest perception of the complicated motives of human action. So that's Gray's sobriety. I hope it's clear. Now we'll move to Arendt's. So Arendt's sobriety, I think to look at Arendt and think of sobriety, I think it's a very natural thought to think about it, because her political thought has been also compared to republicanism or conservatism, and she, on the one hand, critiques modernity, but on the other hand, she wants to remain in modernity, and she, on the one hand, opposes romanticism of the bygone past, even though human condition is debatable, but she's far from idealistic. So intuitively, sober as a virtue of Arendt is compelling, but I could point to one specific text on humanity in dark times, the famous Lessing lecture, and what she found admirable about Lessing is that his humanism is grounded in the reality of human affairs. It's an outlook that engages activities and inhibits plurality of opinions. According to Arendt, Lessing was searching for a discourse that seeks to recognize insolvable questions, while encumbering a togetherness that inspires for truth. For our concern, this could be considered a sober humanism, what Arendt calls a humanity of friendship rather than an abstract fraternity. What she's basically saying is Lessing talked to people. He didn't abstract humanity. Like you could be, this is the characteristic of the enlightened person who loves humanity but hates human beings. This is that. This is Lessing that loves human beings with holding a certain ideas of the Enlightenment. And Arendt brings this counterexample in the lecture about an inner immigration, that intellectuals exiled themselves from Germany. This could be like example of Thomas Mann or other people that just kind of retreated from Germany instead of engaging during the war years. In a parenthesis, but a good one, she brings in the diary of Anne Frank, that it's kind of a sentimentalist escapism, that instead of facing World War II, people are retreating to discourse that's easier than dealing with the past. Or even a harder example would be, which came to my mind, is the famous interview with the SS Treblinka commander Franz Stengel, when he talked about, at the end, when he was in jail, he talked to Serena Sereni about that he really likes Korczak's fairy tales, without even recognizing that Korczak was murdered in Treblinka. Though he wasn't there, in contrast to popular belief, he wasn't in Treblinka when Korczak was killed, but and he probably didn't even know who he was, but the fact that he's reading the fairy tales and thinking how beautiful they are without really dealing with reality. Now we're getting to the last subject. How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, good. So the last subject, which leads me to Heidegger, all things lead to Heidegger, is that Gray and Arendt's relationship with Heidegger. Gray got a Fulbright scholarship in the 50s, in 54, 55, and he went to Munich and the Albert Ludwig University, and he met in Freiburg Heidegger. And he eventually became friendly with Heidegger, and probably with the recommendations with Arendt, he was head of the editing of the first translations of Heidegger in 65. And to this day, his translations are considered top in English, like What is Called Thinking. But, and while with Heidegger, and in a commemorating essay in 77, he writes that, as such, had no inclination to become a disciple and have long disliked the cultic aspects of certain uncritical admirers of his. I resolved to meet him on a respectful but decidedly non-differential level. And Gray writes to Arendt at 67, I find I really like him as a philosopher. And in the same series of correspondence, while discussing the translation into Introduction to Metaphysics, Arendt reminds Gray Heidegger's involvement with Nazism, writing to Gray that was a grotesque error, and that she's suspicious that by including the translation, parts of him embracing Nazism, he is trying to apologetic about his misconception of Nazism. More serious for Arendt, he hadn't abandoned some of his ideas from his infamous 1933 rectorship address. And despite all her hesitancies, Gray convinced Arendt that Heidegger had mellowed. That's a quote. He said she's mellowed out. And the request of Heidegger, she came to Germany in 1967 to give a lecture. For Blücher, she came with Blücher, and this was the first time he met Heidegger, and apparently it was a good experience for everyone. And the reunion was enough for Arendt to famously contribute to the Festschrift article. But even though for both of them Heidegger was the philosopher par excellence, for Arendt and Gray and his influence on both thinkers was immense, they pertained to the understanding and understood that Heidegger's philosophy is indispensable. They continue to be critical. And Gray's articles on Heidegger display that. And to summarize my talk, in 1967, Gray writes to Arendt saying, there's much that is humanely likable about Heidegger, but also much that repels me. My real purpose here is to come to terms with what is acceptable and what is unacceptable in his philosophy. Arendt and Gray were committed to philosophical thinking, but were averse to being swept away in their own thoughts. In the case before, I'm becoming Heideggerian, and this exemplifies a philosophical sobriety. That it's a willingness to be engrossed in thought, but stops before drinking the hemlock.